The taste of bitter strawberries flowed down her throat once more. The bruises on her skin slowly shrank, though they didn't disappear completely. She felt a small rush of rejuvenation throughout her body, returning some of the energy she'd lost during her fight. It was only a small amount, but she had to take whatever she could get. She still felt winded, her body still ached, and she probably had a cracked bone or two still left in her body. But she could recover from a stab wound through the shoulder. She could brush off a few bruises. With the bottle emptied, she tossed it aside, a shiver running through her body as the medical drink finished taking effect. She stood on her hooves and gave a small stretch, feeling her bones popping in place and her muscles ache. She panted softly as her lungs demanded more air, and she sat back down. She knew she couldn't stay in one place for too long, but she just needed another moment. Merlin's spell was doing circles in her head, trying to process the new information she just received. Though she knew how it worked, she couldn't completely decipher it. The spell called for her to focus her magic into a single spot and channel as much of it as she could into a single cast of the spell. It was a very all-or-nothing kind of spell, and that worried Twilight. He had said that the spell had the power to save everyone, but if she only got one chance to cast it, even if she was willing to risk the possible passing out, or being without her magic for a short while in this hell of a world, there was still the fact that she had to break through the seal restraining the spell. The spell was designed in such a complex way that it would not work unless the seal was broken, and no matter which way Twilight looked at it, she couldn't think of how the spell could be made without the seal. Merlin certainly knew how to craft a spell, she thought to herself, letting out a slow sigh as she stopped thinking about the spell for a moment. Merlin had said that the seal required her to meet a great emotional distress in order to break it. Not for a moment did she think the seal would be a problem to break. She had been hurt, nearly killed, broken down crying several times, watched her friends be mutilated before her, and just let the world break her several times. Emotional distress she had plenty of. So she had a spell that could save everyone. But she couldn't use it right now. She had no idea what it did, why it did it, or what the end result would be. She needed to be someplace safe, someplace where she could rest for a bit and let her magic recuperate after casting the spell. Finding Magus came to mind, but that would require her to escape the hell she now found herself in. She knew that was possible, at least. Every time she'd come face to face with some big monster, this ghastly world at least returned to some resemblance of Ponyville. And when the town was like that, she would be able to find Magus. However, she had just finished off a big monster that had nearly succeeded in killing her. The memory in her head floated away from her body in a black abyss, came back to her mind as she put her hoof to her neck. She had come very close to being killed. And yet there she was, still in this awful other world. Am I trapped here now? Am I not allowed to leave? Twilight shuddered, taking a deep breath to try and calm herself. Her mind was starting to escape her again, and she had to keep it under control. She hadn't made it this far alive. She could make it out of here. The sound of hooves striking on the metal floor from behind her made her nearly jump out of her skin. As quickly as she could muster, she summoned the black sword and swung her body around, holding it ready to strike at the pony approaching from behind her. Her vicious gaze fell upon a cloaked figure, strolling towards her before coming to a stop. Twilight recognized the pony, though she had completely forgotten about her every time she'd shown up. But she had followed her through this whole incident, cryptically saying things that either didn't make sense or just left her with more questions. Never once had she offered an explanation, given any assistance, or even shown her face. Twilight was sick of it now. She'd had enough of this nonsense to last her a lifetime. "Stay right there! Don't you dare take another step!" Twilight growled, her teeth clenched as she glared at the pony. "Are you a monster, or aren't you? Show your face! I'm sick of this, of everything! Are you here to help me, or kill me, like the rest of this town?" Twilight could hear herself panting heavily. The only thing on her mind was the pony before her and what she was going to do to them if they were an enemy. The air was still between them, the cloaked pony not moving an inch, not saying a word. Twilight held the soul orb tightly, adjusting it a little, just to ensure she could get a clean swing in should an attack head her way. She was watching carefully, making sure she didn't miss a detail. The cloaked figure remained silent for what Twilight counted as a minute before it finally spoke. "Twilight Sparkle, I am not your foe. I simply know of your woe." The pony reached up to the hood covering her face, grabbing hold of it and pulling it back to reveal herself. Twilight's eyes widened as she stared at the pony before her, if she could even call it a pony. She wasn't sure there was enough there to be called a pony. The pony in the robe was nothing more than a skeleton, missing all flesh and muscles to bind to its bones. The black eyes of its empty skull stared back at her. Its bony mouth opened as it began to speak once more. "I watched over ponies since long before, seen countless generations and their spawn. I see time flow and eras pass, with all trying to see time through the looking glass. I see what can be and what will occur, everything that life offers and that will occur. I am there when life begins, to view all of pony sins. You all say my name with your last breath." The cloaked figure tilted its head. A chill ran up Twilight's back. "Every pony knows me as Death." You? You can't be!" Twilight called out, slashing her sword through the air. The edge of the blade struck the ground, carving a small groove into it. "You're Death? Death isn't even a pony, it's a concept. There is no harbinger of death. You're lying." Twilight pointed the sword at the robed skeleton before her, the sword lightly shaking as she tried to calm herself down. "You still have your doubt, after all. Prove that your mind has not been made the final fall." The mare's voice seemed to be joined by the quiet tacking sound now, the sound of her bones clicking together as she talked. "But this is where we will part ways. Can you truly say that my words betray?" The shaking sword faltered for a moment as Twilight tried to absorb her words. Of all the possibilities in this world, she'd never thought she'd meet someone, or something, that claimed to be the harbinger of death. Something like that was only true in fairy tales, stories passed down of a ghostly image you see before you die. Even with all the monsters she'd seen in her life, she never would have thought something would manifest the concept of death itself. "Okay, so what if you are Death? Why are you here? Why are you following me? An omen? Watching me as I slowly die in this world? Well, sorry to disappoint, but I have no plans of dying today. I'm going to save my friends. I'm going to save Ponyville, and I'm going to bring an end to this nightmare once and for all." Her sword stopped shaking, determination flowing through her body once again. If Death wanted her life, she wasn't about to hand it over. She had come too far to let it end here. "I came not for thee, Twilight Sparkle. This world is as seen, merciless and feral. The lives of many are tied to this world, gathered together in a place that is all but unfurled." The skeletal mare turned away from Twilight, stepping towards one of the walls. Twilight stared, confused, unsure of what Death's next move would be. Death raised her hoof to the wall and pressed against it gently. She stood there for a moment before removing her hoof from the surface. The sound of stone grinding against steel began to echo through the empty ballroom, as the wall split open and began to show a path. A path had appeared from behind the opening, appearing to be a lightless hallway leading somewhere. "My hooves were not made to dwell in the lands of mortals. I exist here only due to maddened angels. I wish to see this realm that mocks my land cease to be, so that ponies may once return to their lives carefree. You are the only one with that power now, to defeat the darkness by heaven's vow." Death stood next to the opening, staring at Twilight. She shifted her hooves uncertainly. She had no other way out of the room but for the way that Death had opened for her. With that thought, she sent chills down her back. She had to follow Death's path. Not a thought she liked in the least. She considered her options for a moment, realizing she really didn't have much other choice. This world had shown her repeatedly that she had to follow the paths before her, and that any other path would be blocked off or locked unless she had a key or solved some kind of puzzle. There really was no other option. Hesitantly, she put her hoof forward and began to walk, heading for the imposing doorway that stood before her. She came to a stop just a foot away from it, Death standing next to her. Death stared at her with that featureless face, as if the empty sockets could see straight into her soul. Another shiver ran down her back, and she turned her look Death in the face. "Answer me just one thing before I go," Twilight almost whispered, knowing once she stepped forward there was absolutely no turning back. "Are my friends okay?" "Those whose fates are tied to you will be made clear soon. A fate similar to the eyes of the pale moon." The words didn't comfort Twilight a bit, as she gripped her magic around the black blade. "I am certain that their fate will be one you find to be in your favor, for not every thread will leave your quiver." "Right," Twilight murmured, looking back at the dark hallway before her. She raised her hoof and turned on the light from her pendant, illuminating some of the hallway before her. "I guess this is goodbye, then." "You are correct that we will not meet again this way. The next time we meet will be under the gaze of madmen." With those words, Death turned from Twilight and walked towards the center of the ballroom. Twilight's eyes followed her for a moment or two, before returning to the hallway before her. "Comforting?" Twilight murmured to herself, before taking the first step into the darkened abyss. Once she'd made several strides, the sound of grinding stone on metal returned as the hallway sealed off behind her, trapping her in the eternal dark of the hallway. The only light that came from her was from the pendant, and she kept a grip on her sword tight. There wasn't much room in here, only maybe a foot or two on each side of her, but she had to move forward. The light only reached a few feet ahead of her, before getting the thick darkness that encompassed the hallway. There was no sound there, just the constant beat of her hooves against the ground. The walls seemed a dull red, covered in stains and cracks, the only things that crossed her vision as she walked. Step by step, she continued further down the hallway, her black sword hovering by her side, ready to strike anything that might cross her path. She had no idea how far the path might stretch, but she knew that as long as it continued to stretch forward, she had to follow it. There was no turning back. Her way back had been sealed. Her only goal now was to reach the end of this nightmare. "I suppose there's no forgiveness for me this time." Twilight stopped in her tracks as a familiar voice echoed through the hallway. "Hello?" she called out, desperate to hear the pony's voice again. "I've gone too far. There's no turning back." The voice echoed through the hall as if coming from the dark abyss before her. Realizing they might be ahead, she began to pick up the pace, heading towards the end of the hall faster now. "I suppose, in the end, I have earned everything I have now." The voice sounded familiar, one she'd heard all of her life. It had been so long since she last heard it, but she knew the voice. "But what I have is not something I ever desired." It was Celestia's voice. She could hear her mentor's voice echoing through the hallway. Her quickened walk turned into a full-on gallop, racing to try and reach the end of the hallway, to see her face once more, to be able to hold her in an embrace, to know she was okay. "There's no undoing my sins. I can only look towards tomorrow." Where was she? Her voice was so clear, but she seemed so far away. Twilight had to reach her, wanted to reach her. The echoes of her hooves rang loudly, her desire to see her mentor once more. "Perhaps one day I can atone for these sins." Just as Celestia's voice vanished, the seemingly endless hallway opened up. Twilight skidded to a halt as a large room appeared before her. Twisted metal chandeliers circled the ceiling and cast a dim light down into the circular room. On each side of the circular room were two doors made of stone and covered in intricate carvings. In the center of the room, though, was a massive door, covered in a large depiction of Celestia pressing against one of the crosses she had in town. Beneath her, flames flickered, ready to burn the princess's flesh, while behind her were the shadows of ponies long since gone. At the bottom of the door were 4 squares, looking similar to the indents she'd seen around town, that indicated something went into their slots. "Celestia! She must be behind that door!" Twilight said, hoping that her mentor was just within her reach. She walked up to the large doors and inspected the holes, seeing something written underneath them. Only once memories have gathered will the hallowed chamber open. With a press of her hoof, she confirmed that the doors weren't going to budge. Just another obstacle on her path. Twilight let out a reluctant sigh and took a step back, staring at the depiction of Celestia on the cross. She had already seen 3 ponies die in her hooves because of that accursed symbol. She wasn't about to let her mentor follow the same fate. Her eyes wandered to the 4 doors around the room and quickly stepped over to the one on the far right. The carvings on the door depicted a soldier, a weapon in his mouth as it faced down a dragon. A few thoughts ran through Twilight's mind, but something told her the key to opening the big door was in the smaller doors around the room. She raised her hooves and pressed against it, and the stone door slowly opened, grinding against the floor. Stepping through the thick doors, they quickly closed behind her when she was in the room. It was pitch black inside, save for the light coming from her pendant. She couldn't see very far, but she thought she could see the edges of the room. It seemed to be a small, cramped square room, with just barely enough room for a pony to be able to live in it. A quiet, whining groan struck her ears, and she pointed her light forward. Before her appeared one of the many soldiers she had seen throughout town, the clanking of metal hitting each other as its head moved slowly. A bit of its flesh fell from its face as it turned towards the light, the pained whine coming from the creature. Twilight stared at it, the soldier slowly moving as it seemed to adjust to being on its feet once more. It lowered its head slowly and grabbed a spear that was lying at its hoofs, picking it up. The soldier seemed different from the others. It didn't move with technical precision. It seemed slow and shambling, almost as if it didn't want to fight. But it started lurching forward, shifting the spear and lunging at Twilight. "Sorry, you're in the way." Twilight spoke quickly, the black sword moving swiftly to her side. The blade swung without hesitation, splitting the spear into pieces. With another swing, the soldier stopped moving. The pained whine stopped as the 2 of them stood there for a moment, before the armored pony crumpled into a pile on the floor. Blood began to spill from the soldier's neck, though not a drop appeared on her blade. She'd made the cut quick and swift, ending the fight before it really began. Twilight stared at the body, almost unable to register that she'd struck down yet another living creature. The first time she'd done it, she had broken down and cried. Even though it had tried to eat her, she never wanted to kill it. But she'd killed so many now. So many had tried to kill her in return. What was another monster dead? They weren't ponies, no matter what Magus said. She couldn't hold back against them, or else she'd find herself dead. And she had to live. She had to. It was the only one who could stop all of this. Twilight nearly jumped as a light appeared from the body of the soldier. It floated up from the body and headed for the center of the room. Twilight stared as the light centered itself, and then began to expand. Her eyes widened as she realized that this was just like the other times her vision had been shrouded in light. It was the light that always accompanied memories. "Captain!" The loud cries of a soldier rang out as the blast of intense fire engulfed his being. In a matter of moments, the charred corpse of a pony fell to the ground. A dragon's roar pierced through the following silence, which caused the soldiers to erupt into a frenzy of panicking yells. The large body of soldiers began to scramble, some fleeing from the battlefield, while others looked for places to hide. Any semblance of an organized fight had now been lost, fear and panic swelling through the soldiers. Towering before them was a large black dragon, one that filled the hearts of ponies with dread. Acnologia, the dragon of the apocalypse. "No! Stop! You mustn't run away now! We have to fight!" The Grand Ruler of Equestria, Princess Celestia, stood before her soldiers, looking at them in shock. "If we lose now, we lose Equestria forever!" "Princess, we must escape!" A panicking soldier near the princess cried. "We've lost 70% of our soldiers. The captain was just obliterated, and we've barely even made a dent in the beast. We can't win. We have to escape!" The soldier then turned and ran. The battlefield that was once filled with soldiers was emptying, leaving only the charred and bloody remains of their fellow ponies behind. Stop! I order you to fight! Celestia bellowed out, but no soldiers listened to the command of their leader. The field was emptying of soldiers, leaving the Alicorn alone on the field. You cowards! The monarch spat bitterly. The loud thud of mass and muscle stepping behind her broke her from her thoughts, and her heart sank. The hot air of the dragon's breath rushed over her neck as chills ran down her spine. Her head slowly turned, the black dragon appearing within the corner of her vision. Another bellow of hot air crossed her back as a deep chuckle ran through the beast's neck. So, the mighty ruler of Equestria, stranded by her soldiers. The dragon laughed, staring at the princess, who was unable to move. Oh, how the mighty do fall. It's laughable to think you even stood a chance against me. Hacknologia. Celestia hissed, her body slowly turning to face the dragon. Her eyes glared daggers, but failed to hide the fear that surrounded her. You will not destroy my lands or my subjects. We will stop you. But her words were interrupted when air escaped her body. The large, sharp talons of Acnologia wrapped around her body and squeezed, lifting her up into the air suddenly. Acnologia brought her to face level with him, his rows of teeth gleaming through his grin. Your land, your subjects. Acnologia lifted his head, and a laugh echoed across the land. Celestia's eyes twitched as she struggled to breathe, her whole body shuddering from the sound of the mighty dragon laughing. Her body shifted as his hand moved, turning her to face the lands that they had been fighting on. View your lands, your subjects. I do not see anything that belongs to you anymore. The fields surrounding the battle were scorched black, fires burning in various spots. Charred and maimed corpses littered the ground, the remnants of a large army that had acquired to fight the dragon. The lush world they had stepped into had been reduced to nothing but a burning wasteland of death. A sharp pain filled her chest as she stared at the destruction of the things she held dear. You are no longer the ruler of these lands, princess. These lands are mine. Celestia was turned to meet his gaze once more, her eyes staring back into the red depths of his vision. She grit her teeth, unable to say anything, barely even able to speak. There was nothing she could do anymore. She was powerless. Damn you, she spat bitterly again, struggling against his hand. There's no point in struggling anymore. Just accept it. You all belong to me now. I decide whether you live or die, whether you have a home today or not. I get to enjoy every moment of playing with your lives. The dragon chuckled, seeing the look of fury on Celestia's face, knowing just how powerless she actually was. But for you, dear princess, I'm willing to let you live, under the condition that you serve me for the rest of your days. Celestia's eyes widened in horror at his words. You can't be serious. Her lips trembled as the horror of the situation began to settle in. It's either that, or die here. The dragon chuckled, his grinning growing wider as he stared her down. Celestia's mouth hung agape as her mind tried to even process what he was saying. She was the ruler of Equestria. She was no one's subject. She had helped the age of ponies out of its darkest times, out of being ruled by madmen and corrupt royalty. She had made the world a better place. Only for this dragon, this monster, to seize everything she'd ever worked for? Very well. The dragon growled before she even had a chance to respond. His mouth opened, bearing several large rows of razor-sharp teeth for her to see. Some were clearly stained with blood that had once belonged to her former soldiers. The slimy tongue rolled out, and her head was being placed into its mouth. Its hot breath washed over her face and mane. This can't be the end. Celestia's mind panicked. Flashes of the teeth crunching down on her neck appearing in her mind. I can't die here. I've lived long, for so long already. What were the last 1,000 years if I die now? What was the point of everything I've done? The world seemed to move slowly as she felt the heat grow hotter and the mouth open wider. He was seconds away from devouring her. No, I can't. I can't die here. I can't die! Wait! Acnologia stopped his movements, hearing the shrill cry of the princess in his mouth. He slowly pulled her out, raising an eyebrow curiously as he looked at the trembling princess in his hand. Her voice cracked, hot tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. I'll do it. Acnologia's grin reflected his devilish joy upon hearing those words. That's what I thought. His draconic voice chuckled. I'm glad we could come to this agreement. What do you want me to do? She nearly bit her tongue as the words fell out of her mouth with a vile bite. Every inch of her mind was telling her what she was doing was wrong, but she couldn't stop herself. She had to live. She had to. Well, you see, I can't possibly be everywhere in Equestria at once, as much as I'd love to ravage more lands and partake in more delicacies. So I want you, dear princess, is to periodically send me your subjects. His laughter echoed once more. You will send them to me for me to feast on, so that I may partake in ponies from 2 parts of the country at once. Celestia's mind reeled. He was ordering her to send her subjects to their death. Not just their death, but to be eaten, to be devoured by this dragon. The subjects that looked up to her, that trusted her, that saw her as the leader that carried them through the dark ages of pony kind. He was asking her to betray them, betray all of them, so that she could live, to send them in her place. Well, Acnologia did not care to wait for an answer. Answer now, or I'll just devour you. Celestia's head lowered, her tears streaking down his scales as she grit her teeth. Fine. I'll send you my subjects. The draconic laughter echoed across the fields as Acnologia let out a loud, billowing laugh. His laughter echoed through her ears and unto her heart, as she could feel it shatter into pieces.